We've been talking about some of the struggles from DC Comics for some time on this channel, specifically their insistence on following a lot of Marvel's failed strategies in the past, and they are revisiting a new strategy lately, one that portends some bad things about the ordering status of a couple of comic books that they thought were going to be important. And here with me to talk about that is the DC Comics aficionado himself, the Batman historian, Josh McDonald. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well, Wes. I am I'm ready to dive into these DC issues again. It feels like it's weekly. This is a different issue, and we just kind of have to like look at it. And I think, if you go back a year to a year and a half, we're like, God, what's going on at DC? And now we just shake our head and be like, oh, what was and what could have been. I don't know. They're a mess right now, man.
They've been following a lot of Marvel's failed strategies, and the new one that they're following is the overprint, where essentially whatever you order, they send you extra by a certain amount. With Aquaman I think it's number 2, they overshipped it by 30% with an exclusive black and white Jim Lee variant cover, i.e. they need to get more interest in the title. But shockingly, they are overshipping Flashpoint Beyond number 0, and they're also offering a bevy of extras on top of that for Flashpoint Beyond number 1, i.e. they're going to ship it to you, and they're going to give you some freight costs that go along with it, and you're going to get a bigger discount than you normally would, so you'll make more money on top of that. And by all means, this indicates that the orders for Flashpoint Beyond number 0 were far softer than DC Comics anticipated. And the other thing that they did was they pushed back the shipping schedule. Flashpoint Beyond was going to come out every 2 weeks, have been moved out to a monthly schedule, and the release date has been pushed out so they can generate more interest on the 0 issue, which is being overshipped because apparently not even Jeff Johns returning to DC after a couple years gets people ordering comics now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the shocking things for me is the report that we read about this openly said that the orders, were lower than expected. And I can't help but look at this and go, one, maybe you should have pushed the idea or the fact that Jeff Johns is writing this a little harder. And once you get past issue number 0, he's only a co-writer. But I still would have leaned heavily into that just because of the sales success they saw with 3 Jokers. And I don't think they did enough to lean into that. But I think you're also seeing this aspect of 2 things kind of hurt this book. One, we've got so many different things going on that you have to wonder, does this even matter? Why should I pick this up? And we haven't really gotten an answer for that. But 2, it was originally going to be on, I think, a bi-weekly schedule, so twice a month. And I think people's pocketbooks, they're running out of money. They have to pick and choose what they're going to get. And when you're doing double ships, typically you see quality drops, if not in the writing, then for sure in the art. And then people just, they have to start looking at it strategically. Do I want to get this? I don't have much confidence in it. What about this over here? So you kind of, leaned your hand into not getting this book as much excitement as it could have had. So I think the decisions they're making are the right decisions. And I think this is going to be an instance where you're going to get issue number 0. It's going to be strong because Jeff Johns is quality. And you're probably going to build some momentum that way. It might be a little too late, but we'll see.
I think there are a few other extenuating circumstances around this. One big thing, obviously, is the overabundance of Batman. Do we really need another Batman title, even if it's written by Jeff Johns? But who was really asking to go back and revisit Flashpoint? I don't think it's the worst thing that's ever happened to DC Comics, but it's not something I was like, I could really use some more Flashpoint. We've had the Flashpoint Batman within the end of Tom King's Batman run. We've got this Flashpoint Batman in Justice League Incarnate with Joshua Williamson. So it's not like it's even a character that we haven't even seen lately.
Yeah, it is a weird thing because the whole point of Flashpoint was to lead us from one continuity into another. So the fact that DC keeps going back to that well is interesting. And I kind of want to be like, hey, you're not going back far enough. Go back to pre-Flashpoint. I think that's what a large amount of your audience really wants. But it is interesting. And no, I don't know if there is much excitement because you forgot. We also went back to Flashpoint for Dark Multiverse. Like we've hit it quite a bit recently. And it's in its own respect, it's becoming a little oversaturated as well. Not as bad as Batman, not even close to being as oversaturated as Batman. But there's only so much you can do there.
With Jeff Johns, I think a lot of people would have liked to have seen that sequel to 3 Jokers, which we know that he had approached DC Comics with. I believe he and Jason Fabok were both on board, and they never got back to him. And it's like, this is the project that you returned his phone calls for? I don't imagine we're going to get to see Jeff Johns a whole lot at DC Comics in the future. I think we'll see him here and there for a few opportunities. I'm personally going to read it because I'm a Jeff Johns fan, but as you mentioned, he is a co-writer after the Zero issue. Jeremy Adams is doing great stuff on Flash, but he's not a big name. The other not big name on there is Tim Sheridan, and anybody that read his Teen Titans Academy book is probably just turned off the comic books in general, let alone just his name being on there. I truly think that DC Comics leadership, their editorial staff, like their bigwigs, don't know who their talents are and how they're perceived by their own paying audience.
Oh yeah, I don't think they have that. Part of the problem is in the industry right now, everyone's great, everyone's wonderful, nothing's bad. So when you have that mentality, you're going to make like poor business decisions, and that's DC's problem. They're not making good business decisions. As for the co-writing, part of me wonders too, just because, it is known that DC didn't get back with Johns and Fabok on Three Jokers. I'm wondering if this is a story that was partially cooked up years ago as a potential like touchback to Flashpoint if they wanted to. DC decided not to run with it at the time, and now it's kind of convenient to pull it out of the toy box. So I'll be curious to see if that is actually playing into the role here of what's going on, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, my expectation is that after Flashpoint Batman #0, that Jeff Johns has outlined the story, and that it's actually Jeremy Adams and Tim Sheridan that are fleshing it out and doing the dialogue and putting the pieces together.
That's kind of what my suspicion is as well. And as you mentioned, Jeremy Adams, hey, he gives me hope. Tim Sheridan, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, there's nothing you can say nice about the guy after what he has done in his limited opportunities at DC Comics so far. You're wondering what they're thinking, but this isn't the only thing they've really screwed up. You look at that Trial of the Amazons. Michael Conrad, Becky Cloonan, V.I. Alice, Stephanie Phillips, Stephanie Williams. Like, could we not put one good name to put at the top of the marquee to say, look, Scott Snyder's associated with this, or Joshua Williamson's associated with this, or James Tide is associated with this. Like, ooh, it's Cloonrad? Like, that's the big name? No one goes and buys a comic for them. And in fact, at this point, I think a lot of those creators, like, their name feels like a warning sign that this is probably not going to be quality.
Yes, but within the industry, everyone is great and all of their work is excellent.
Well, that's nice, but that shit in one hand and trying to make money the other one. You know what I mean?
No, but yeah, exactly. I mean, look, there's a point where you have to just kind of be direct. If you're going to run a business, you have to be direct. If a book's not selling, a book's not selling. And sales don't equate to quality. And I get quality is subjective. People like different things. But if your feedback, the majority of the feedback is negative and your book isn't selling and it's continuing with the same writers over and over and over again, at some point you have to say, hey, this isn't working out, or they need to develop more. And DC doesn't seem willing to do that. So, the problems they have, they created themselves.
And a lot of these problems that they have are following in the footsteps of problems that Marvel had like 10, 12, 7 years ago, whether it's constant reboots, too many events, tons of gender swaps, sexuality swaps, changing out the mantles. They're doing essentially everything that Marvel did, and now they're having to resort to overprinting a book. Not just any book, though. They're overprinting a Jeff Johns DC comic. They need to look in the mirror and say, what isn't working? Where have we lost our audience, and what do we need to go engage them and assure them that we're bringing back what they wanted and what they were there to begin with for? Because it's obviously that's not what fans see right now.
No, not at all. And you're right. They definitely do need to ask that question. I think they need to ask more questions, and they don't do it because they're too busy being prideful, and they're too busy just thinking that the audience is nothing but trolls. Whatever feedback you get, whether it's positive or negative, you have to take it with a grain of salt. And until DC is able to do that, you're probably not going to see a change in their stories, their storytelling, or their strategic approach. Hopefully that'll change in the near future once Discover comes in, but I don't expect to see anything like that at least for another year. Until then, I think we're going to keep seeing the same decisions being made with the same fruits coming out of that labor, which isn't much.
Yeah, it's crazy because they do have this Dark Crisis event. Obviously, we've been talking about it here on the channel. if you can't sell, a Flashpoint story with Jeff Johns, I think it's going to be hard to sell this Dark Crisis with Joshua Williamson. Does not have the name cachet. He's a very good writer, but he's having to work with a bunch of pieces that people don't want to read anyway. So
No.
it almost doesn't matter who you put on there. You got to kind of straighten the universe out and come up with a plan first.
Yeah. With Dark Crisis, it's interesting because I think before we even found out what Dark Crisis was, the moment there was a rumbling of a crisis, people were against it. And I think rightfully so. We're sick of having the status quo changed. And it gets, faster and faster. It goes from like 20 years to 10 years to 5 years to we're at a little over a year at this point. They don't want it. We don't want it. We just want to be able to have our books, let them breathe, let us have our stories, and then sure, down the line, let's have another crisis. But you're right. I think the other aspect of this is the characters in focus of this Dark Crisis are characters that people don't have an interest in. Like we've seen that. It's in sales numbers. It's not there. They tried it. It didn't work. And now they're doubling down and it's not going to work. And when it doesn't work, they're going to be shocked. We don't understand why this event didn't sell well. I mean, it's in the history. Just all you have to do is look at your numbers.
Well, and they were given feedback, the entire time when they was rumblings that it was going to happen, and when they finally got the information out there. I think DC really, really does need to understand that their audience and Marvel's audience, while there's certainly crossover, they're different.
Yeah.
They specifically brought in Brian Michael Bendis to incorporate some of those Marvel ideas into DC Comics. It didn't work. And is it their pride? Is it hubris that won't allow them to go, you know what? Let's bring in some people that know DC Comics and what DC Comics fans want and see if we can write this ship. But it feels like every month they're just going further and further along down this path, turning more and more readers off. Hey, eventually, if you give them no reason to come back for long enough, they're just not gonna come back.
Oh no, not at all. We've seen that even when you have successful books and they take a break or a hiatus, you give readers the opportunity to understand that they don't actually need to pick up that book every month. If you give readers a break, even if it's not a break, but if you give them a reason to step away from something they already didn't care for, what makes you think they're going to come back? They're not going to. And that's what we're seeing time and time and time again. And DC still kind of over here scratching their heads, trying to figure things out, trying to figure out what direction to go, and then doing the exact same thing that they've done 2 or 3 times now that Marvel also did, 5 to 10 years ago. Nobody's learning the lesson here.
It's absolutely frustrating to be a DC Comics fan. They're doing more things that Marvel did that never worked out for them to begin with. I mentioned earlier that bringing Brian Michael Bendis into DC Comics was almost a death blow for DC Comics and DC Comics fans. That's not the only thing that really killed off Rebirth and the momentum that DC had. Actually, Dark Knight's Metal played a large part to do with that as far as the death of Rebirth and incorporating a lot of these Marvel ideas into DC Comics. Definitely check this video out if you want some information on that and how we all got here.